So yes, you and I have already driven the N flavor of the Elantra and learned that it is very good. Yet in that episode, we overlooked a very inconvenient fact. Most car manufacturers, if they expect to make any money on their four-wheeled conveyances, they need to have two pedals. Another fact we overlooked at that track, there happened to be some free time. And Hyundai just happened to bring along one of those two-pedal examples. So take a wild guess what you and I are going to do today. So all the important bits, with the exception of one, are the same as the car you and I have already driven, but that was way back in November, which means we need to do a very quick recap. 2-liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine, 276 horsepower and 289 pound-feet of torque. There is an overboost function which temporarily raises the horsepower to 286. Now there, it also has a very stupid name, N-Giggle mode. Anyway, that brings about a very interesting question. Aside from the larger block, how does this develop more power? Well, the turbocharger changes. The turbine wheel specifically grows to 52 millimeters. Now, moving beyond the engine, there is quite a bit of support for the extra output. The first stop would be the brakes. See what I did there? 14.2-inch diameter rotors in the front, 12.4 in the rear. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, that's still a floating caliper setup, so these aren't like a fancy Brembo setup we learned in the previous episode. Works incredibly well on this vehicle. Struts in the front, multi-link in the back. However, in the front, there's a 23 millimeter diameter stabilizer bar. In the back, it's 24 millimeter. Working in conjunction with that is a bit of stiffening. Specifically between the back seat and the trunk, there's a brace, and the idea there is to add more lateral stiffness to the overall vehicle. All of that sits on a 20 millimeter lower suspension. Then there's the reason why we're here today, and that is the transmission. This is an 8-speed wet dual clutch. That should sound familiar. It's the same unit that we've driven in many other Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis vehicles. It's unique for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is designed, engineered, and built in-house by the Hyundai Motor Group. And then number two, it's a wet dual clutch system. Now, why is that important? Well, it has its own transmission oil cooler. And put those two together, the idea is to be able to tune the transmission for the specific application. And considering the application here is to be unlike most other Hyundais and Kias, let's go to the track. This one is 3,296 pounds. This one, you know what? We're just gonna go right into it because there is no one else on this track and it's someone else paying for the track time. Here we go. DCT. Oh, hey now, wow. That was torque steer. I told you about torque steer as a feature, not a bug, when we drove the manual version of this thing. There is a launch control. I didn't fool around with it because I was just so rushed to get on the track, and I had a camera fail as I was just about to hit the track, so I probably burned about 4 minutes of my free 10 minutes on the track. So I figured we'd go right into it here. The DCT, I hate to admit this, it pains me to say this, the DCT is the better version of this car, much like the Veloster N. Now, does that mean I would buy the DCT? Well, let's talk about delivery of power. It's the same delivery of power because the engine's the same, but I would argue the reason why the DCT is the better car is because the DCT works in conjunction with the electronic limited slip differential better than the manual. Now, I would probably end up with a manual for no other reason than I want the interaction with the manual. I want a car that I control more than I control this. And that brings us to the point of, do you use the paddle shifts? I had a conversation, I don't know if you've seen it yet, with Albert Bierman, and we were chatting about this transmission now that I've had time to drive it in a lot of different vehicles. And he's like, dude, I can't beat the machine. I don't even try to shift the gears myself. But I'm like, you know, he works for a car, as much as great as he is, as an amazing engineer as this guy is. I'm like, dude, you work for a car company. The PR people told you to say that. But the reality is, I've now had this on a track, and I've had the Veloster N on a track. And I gotta tell you, he's right. You really don't spend a lot of time fooling with the paddles. Like here, it did a shift before I was gonna do the shift. Wow, this, okay, we almost lost the ass end there. God, this thing is a pisser to drive. If you were to tell me an almost 300 horsepower turbocharged four-cylinder from Korea with a turbo like this big would be this fun to drive, I would tell you, you are crazy. But this, it's, you know, if I were Volkswagen, this is just too close for comfort. Is it as refined as the GTI? No, and I just don't think they're trying to make it as refined as the GTI. I think they're trying to make it, well, what does Bierman say? He calls it the Rascal, at least the Kona he calls the Rascal. This, I think this is supposed to be the, I don't know how to describe it as I'm enjoying Sonoma here, but probably the best way to put it, it's supposed to be perfectly imperfect. I think he deliberately said, no, we're not going to try to be a GTI. Other people try to do that, let them do it, and let's make something that, frankly, snorts, crackles, pops, probably gives you too much torque steer, and by doing that, it's a more memorable experience. I'd even go so far as to say, this is better looking. Like, the GTI, it's safe. The Jetta, GLI, it's not attractive, it's too boring. This, the combination of all the geometric shapes they got in the thing, as well as all of like the details, European details that make it more mature, that's, okay, it's handsome, but not attractive. This, you either like it or you don't like it. And that combined with the driving dynamics you like or you don't like makes this thing stand out. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant, one of our favorite Hyundais, the 2022 Hyundai Elantra N, for a base price of $31,900. Now you may notice the car in the hangar, it looks different than the car on the track. That's because it is. It's a different car and a different color. This one is cyber gray. The car you see on the track is performance blue, otherwise known as Korean racing blue. There are basically 5 colors on offer, not many. I think it's this, the blue. There's a red that looks pretty good. Black is the worst because it makes all of the details just wash out. Sadly, the interior, anything you want as long as it's black, please, oh please, oh please, change that. Then move on to the options, and believe it or not, this one has one factory option. It's transmission, $1,500, but it's not just the DCT you're paying for. With the DCT, if you remember in the previous episode, that's the only way you can get the sunroof. So if you want a DCT, you gotta like the sunroof. If you want a manual, you gotta hate the sunroof. Then the only other thing we add is a destination handling from Ulsan, Korea for $1,045, which brings us to a total retail price of $34,445. Oh, and just so you know, the reason why I have the window open at the track, it's a rule here at Sonoma. I don't know why they make us do this. It's incredibly annoying because we've got 2 Where to Racing folks here, and they're like, their cars have fixed glass. Granted, it's not glass like this, but it's still fixed glass. Are we going that fast? No. But you know what? Feedback to Sonoma, can we just put the windows up? It's fine, especially if I've got a helmet. So you and I have done this rodeo with the Elantra N twice now, which brings me to the following conclusion. Whether it's the manual or the DCT, that's still a personal preference. Yes, the DCT makes the overall package better. Either way, I would totally daily one of these things, which brings us to the wish list, and that it is all about the interior. Design-wise, it's great, but the execution, it is horrific. There are bits of plastic in there that it's not the cheap seats, it's just bad. And having done this for now almost 13 years, that's not something that's impossible from fixing. And in reality, the cost, it's not a lot of money. Like, yeah, in a Mercedes or a Porsche, we'd pay $5 grand extra for a full leather interior. Not looking for that here. I'm looking for some money to be put at the wholesale level of the tactile feel, specifically on the door panels, the dashboard, that kind of stuff. Not huge changes. In reality, someone at a car manufacturer, someone that is a product manager like Mike E, he knows the real cost to fix that interior is $100, maybe $300, maybe $500. Not looking for fancy, just better tactile feel. That's what lets this car down. And oh, while we're at it, more than a black interior, and actually something really obscure, being I've gotten to drive this thing in daily traffic. The radio presets, it used to have like 20, 40, something like that in Hyundais and Kias. This only has like 12. That's very strange to me. Anyway, that is one man's opinion, and this is where I turn the episode around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, a little bit of behind the scenes, and this is very close to home. I went to visit the parents before I got this car, so I flew back into LAX, picked this up at the airport. And it's funny, I was sitting with my mother, she's not a car person. Dad is, but Mom is not. And she saw an Elantra, not an N. She goes, "Oh my God, what is that? That's a really good looking car. I like all those shapes on the side of the car." Who knew? Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.